Jai Mahamaya ki jai, Vishvashtari Mata ki jai, Bole Baba ki jai. We'll go on with chapter 13 from the Devi Bhagavatam retold by Ramesh Menon. Janamajaya asked Vedavyasa eagerly, what happened when the Trimurti returned to the Sea of Dissolution, Muni? How did Vishnu perform the Devi Yagya? Vedavyasa said to the king, free of their womanhood and their Shaktis with them now, the three gods flew back in the Vimana to Ekarnava. When they saw that single infinite ocean, they raised the sea out of it, and the earth was put in part on the marrow of the Asuras, Madhu and Kataiba, and so it was called Medini. Brahma created an ineffable Brahmaloka high above the golden mountain Meru. Vishnu created Vaikuntha above all the other worlds and dwelt there with Sri Lakshmi. And Shiva, the greatest god, made white Kailash, the solitary mountain that was like a full moon risen on the earth, and he lived there with his bhutas and ganas. Between Meru and Brahmaloka, Brahma created Devaloka for Indra and his devas. The wheel of Kal began to turn slowly by the will of the three great gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Then Vishnu in Vaikuntha had a vision of the jewel isle, Manidvipa, and he saw the Devi Bhagavati in her temple and heard her Mula mantra again, resounding from everywhere, the seed of all things. Vishnu remembered who it was that had enabled Brahma himself and Shiva and himself to create the worlds, and he decided he would perform a yagya to worship the Devi and give thanks to her. He invited all the Brahmas, Shiva, and all the other gods. And when that solemn, elaborate, and original fire ceremony was complete, a voice spoke out from the sky saying, Vishnu, from now on you will be the first of all the gods. You shall be the savior of the universe and have first worship everywhere. When Dharma decays in the world, you will incarnate yourself to restore it, and your avatars shall be worshipped forever. The voice faded, but all that heard it were filled with fervent bhakti for she who had spoken, the Devi Bhagavati, wonderful past describing. Janamajaya then asked, Immaculate Vyasa, tell me more about the blessed Devi Purana. I feel wondrous peace steal over me, my spirit, as I listen to you. Vedavyasa said, once in Kosala, in the city of Ayodhya, there ruled the noble king Dhruvasandi. He was a king of Dharma, and Kosala flourished during his reign. The king had two beautiful young wives, Manorama and Lilavati, who were the delight of his days and nights. In due course, they both became pregnant. Manorama gave birth first to a fine prince, and he was named Sudarsana. A month later, Lilavati delivered a radiant child, and they called him Shatrupa. Satrujita. As the two children grew, it turned out that Satrujita was by far the handsomer of the two, and he was the one with a gifted tongue. Soon there was no doubt which of them was the favorite of the people, of the ministers, and sadly, even the king himself. They all openly preferred Satyajita to his less charismatic older brother. The king was a keen hunter, and one day he went out into the jungle, and he and his party wounded a lion with their arrows. Roaring, the beast escaped into the thickest part of the jungle. Though there's hardly any more dangerous sport than this, the king insisted that they follow the lion and kill him. Typically, the king led the hunters himself. The wounded lion left a trail of blood that was easy to follow, and the king and his party went after him. Suddenly, in a small clearing with a shattering roar, the lion charged the king, who drew his sword in a flash and stood his ground, like a lion himself. His hunters shot 100 arrows at the animal in a flurry, but the king of the jungle leapt at the king of men, and they fought like ancient enemies. The others could not shoot at the lion any more for fear of striking their king. Man and beast rolled on the ground together, both roaring, until the king plunged his sword deep into the lion's heart, and the lion tore out the king's throat. Then both lay dead, their bodies fallen across each other. Word flew back to the palace in Ayodhya, and the city was plunged in mourning. Vashishta, who was the Kalguru of the family, arrived in the Vana and performed the last rites for the dead king. His body was cremated in the jungle heart as though one on a field of war where he had fought his last battle. Though Satyajita was a great favorite with the people and even with the king's ministers, there was no question that the older prince, the quieter Sudarshana, would now be king. Being just 5 years old, the princes were not yet of age, but the kingdom must have a sovereign, at least in name. Vasishtha said that the coronation should not be delayed because the people were anxious for their future. But now there arrived in the noble city King Uttajita, Lilavati's father, and he began to say that his grandson Satyajita was only a month younger than the introverted Sudarshana and was far more suited by both gifts and temperament to be the king. Meanwhile, Manorama's father, Virasena, king of Kalinka, arrived in Ayodhya as well, and he, of course, was adamant that his grandson, Sudarshana, be made the king. An acrimonious debate ensued in the royal sabha of that city. Both Uttajita and Virasena had brought their armies with them, and these were camped outside the city gate in case the dispute had to be settled by force. The argument grew louder and more provocative. Uttajita shouted, "Shall only the older prince become king, even if his brother is 100 times more worthy to sit on the throne? And then Sudarshana is only older by 1 month, and that is no difference at all." Virasena cried stubbornly, "The eldest prince is the heir to the throne. It always has been so, and it always shall." Uttajita turned angrily to the ministers of Ayodhya. "All of you always preferred my grandson to the pathetic Sudarshana. Why do you hold your craven tongues now? You know Satyajita is the one fit to be the king. How much wealth has Sudarshana promised you to take his side?" Virasena yelled, "How is your grandson more worthy to become king? Because he has a pretty face and a quail's voice? Are these the qualities a king most needs?" By now Uttajita was beside himself. He roared, "I care whit for your argument. Let us see if Sudarshana sits on the throne as long as I am alive. I will tear you all apart. Why, I will cleave the earth in two if my grandson is not made king." The unseemly debate lasted some moments or even hours, but lasted not some moments or even hours, but days and weeks. It seemed there would never be a solution, for neither Uttajita nor Virasena would give in. In time, word of their tussle flew through all the kingdoms, and other kings arrived in the gates of Ayodhya with their armies and took one side or the other. And indeed, war did break out between Uttajita and Virasena. The two armies fell on each other and let flow a tide of blood. The sky was dark with millions of arrows. The dust on that battlefield rose in clouds and covered the sun's face, so that night seemed to have sat in betweens, or a blood-red twilight, where the dust cloud reflected the lake of gore below. The battle lasted until Uttajita cut Virasena's head from his neck in a scarlet fountain. The legion of Virasena fled screaming. Manorama heard the news and was terrified. She was certain that Uttajita would kill her and her son Sudarshana as well. Desperately, she called her husband's loyal minister, Vidala, who was the most intelligent man in the kingdom. The queen said, "My husband is dead. Yudhishthira has killed my father. My son is still a child, and I have no one to turn to. When Yudhishthira rides into Ayodhya again, both my son and I will be at his mercy. His daughter Lilivata has always been envious of me. Tell me, what should I do, Vidala, and quickly?" It seemed Vidala had already thought of every eventuality. He didn't hesitate a moment before he said, "You must not stay here, and neither must I. We must flee before Yudhishthira returns. I have an uncle, Sabahu, who lives in the forest around Varanasi. He has an army and will protect us." On the pretense of seeing Yudhishthira outside the city gates, Manorama came out of Ayodhya in a chariot with Sudarshana, a maid, and Vidala. Yudhishthira allowed her to perform the last rites for Virasita, and then at twilight she said she would return to Ayodhya. In fact, she slipped away and rode hard for 2 nights and days and reached the banks of the Ganges. But it seemed that her time of misfortune was upon her. Manorama, her servant, Vidala, and the young prince, Sudarsana, were waylaid by some bandits who took all of their jewels and gold they had, and even their chariot and horses. Her whole world destroyed in a few days, the queen crossed the Ganga by raft at night. Vidala feared for her life if they remained on this side of the river. After another day's hard journey, they arrived ragged in Bharadvaja's ashram in Chitrakoot. Little Sudarshana, grave and clinging to his mother's hand. The Muni at the ashram saw the beautiful young queen and said to her in some amazement, "Devi, why are you here in this jungle and your young son with you?" Now all her grief burst from her. She began to sob uncontrollably and could not answer the august Muni. The Muni turned to Vidala, who said quietly, "My lord, this is Manorama, who was King Dhruvasandi's of Kosala's first queen." Vidala told the Rishi all that had transpired in Ayodhya after the king's death. Because the man spoke the truth, the Muni said, "Stay with us in our ashram. You have nothing to fear here, and I promise you that one day Sudarshana shall be king of Ayodhya." And so the Muni gave Manorama and Sudarshana a kutila to live in, and they remained there in peace and with the queen's servant. Vidala also stayed on in the ashram, for he could not go back to Ayodhya. Chapter 14. Vedavyasa said to King Janamajaya, Yudhishthira went back into Ayodhya in triumph, and he asked for Manorama and Sudarshana. He thought they were deceived by his allowing them to cremate Virasena on the battlefield, and now he intended to put them both to the sword. But that queen and her son had fled. Kosala must have a king, so on an auspicious day, Yudhishthira had his grandson Satyajita crowned in Ayodhya. Vasishtha was the chief priest, and all the munis and ministers chanted the Vedas during the solemn ceremony. While outside the palace, 1,000 conches blared in unison, and singing and dancing broke out in the streets. Yet there were those in Ayodhya who were not carried away by the festivities. Such quiet men remembered Manorama and Sudarshana and agonized about where they were. When Yudhishthira had made certain the throne of Ayodhya was secure, he went home to his kingdom. But it was not long before Yudhishthira heard that Manorama and her son were in Muni Bharadvaja's ashram in Chitrakuta. He gathered an army and set out for the Ganga and that mountain beyond her. On Chitrakuta, Manorama heard that Yudhishthira was coming, and she went in tears to the Muni and cried, Muni, what shall I do? Yuchicha means to come here and kill my child, so his grandson is secure on the throne of Ayodhya. Save me, Holy One. My life and my son's are in your hands. When Yuchicha arrived in the ashram, the Muni met him and said, Manorama and her son are in my care. You cannot see them. Yudhishthira replied, I will not leave without taking them with me. You are a man of peace, Muni. Give them to me peacefully, or I will take them by force. The Muni's eyes glittered. He said in a soft voice, You know what happened to Kasika when he tried to take Vasista's cows from the Rishi's ashram with force. I beg you, leave us before I grow angry. The king called his ministers aside and said, I mustn't leave Manorama and Sudarsana alive. Even the weakest enemy can grow strong in time and become a threat. I have killed Virasena. If I spare Manorama and her son, one day they will surely come for my head and my Satyajitas. I must take these two from here and kill them. There is no soldiers in this old hermitage's ashram to prevent me. But his minister said to him in alarm, My lord, never be so rash. This Muni needs no soldiers to fight us. He can reduce our army to ashes with a look from his eyes. If the Muni protects Manorama and her son, we can do them no harm. Moreover, my lord, Manorama has no wealth of any kind. Her son can never be a threat to us. All this world spins round on the wheel of fate. Be merciful today and polite as well. Ask for the Muni's blessings and let us leave here in peace. Yudhishthira struggled a moment with his Kshatriya nature. Then he fell at the Muni's feet and asked his pardon and blessing, which that kindly rishi gave. The king went back to his kingdom. Manorama wept in relief, and she also prostrated herself before the Muni in gratitude. Sudarshana grew in that sanctuary like the moon waxing. His inseparable companions were the Rishi's sons, and it was a joy to see those children at play together. Once the Muni's sons saw Vidala in the ashram while they were at a game with Sudarshana and called out playfully to him, Gleb, Gleb. Sudarshana, who was a little way off, repeated what they said, but leaving out the last consonant. Gleb, he called in his lisping voice, and felt the most delicious stirring in his body. Again and again the child repeated that syllable, never knowing it was the Mula Mantra of Kamadeva, who is the god of love. Each time he felt a soft ecstasy within his body. So without being initiated by any guru other than destiny, the little prince Sudarsana acquired a mystic mantra. He would repeat it in his mind whenever he was alone and just before he fell asleep, and that mantra transformed his very nature. Day by day, he grew more brilliant. When Sudarsana was 11, the Rishi began to teach him the Vedas. They were astonished how quickly he mastered the Dharma Shastras. No one knew about the secret power he had gained from repeating the mantra. The once reticent prince became a magnificent archer and scholar. He knew all he needed to know about politics and the moral sciences. He brimmed with quiet assurance. Then one day, while young Sudarsana sat chanting his mantra, the Devi appeared before him in a vision. She was crimson-hued like a kimsuka flower. She wore scarlet raiment and great blood-red rubies. He saw her as Devi Sri Lakshmi, mounted on Garuda, with her Shaktis all around her. The Devi called Sudarsana softly to follow her through the forest to the banks of the Ganges. The prince went without an instant hesitation, and after he had bathed in the great river, the Devi gave him a splendid bow, 2 magic quivers of arrows, and an unearthly coat of armor. Then she raised her left hand Then she raised her hand over him in benediction and vanished. After this, Sudarsana became a fierce Devi Bhakta and worshipped the goddess whenever he could, often wandering down along the banks to the sacred place that she had appeared to him. Now it happened that the king of Kashi had a lovely daughter called Sashikala. One day the princess sat with her Sakti under a flowering champaka in her garden, when she saw a Brahmana hurrying along into her father's palace. Sashikala stopped the man for fun and cried, "Whither from in such a hurry, Muni?" "Why, from the Muni Bharadvaja's ashram, princess," replied the cheerful mendicant. Playfully, Sashikala asked, "Tell me of an exceptional thing in that ashram, Muni, the most beautiful thing of all." Without hesitation, the Muni said, "Why, the Prince Sudarshana, princess. Ah, he is handsome past describing. That son of the king, Dhruva Sandhi of Ayodhya, I would even say," the Brahma went on breathlessly, "that if you haven't seen our prince, your eyes have been given you in vain. And besides, he is a great archer and a deep scholar too. Well, let me put it thus, lovely Sashikala. Our Sudarshana is fit to be your husband." And smiling broadly, the Muni breezed away on his errand, leaving Sashikali flushed, a little short of breath, her heart beating faster than ever before in her life. The Rishi's description captured the princess's imagination, and she fell in love with Sudarshana without ever having seen him. One night, perhaps a month after she had heard of the prince in this jungle, Sashikali dreamt of the Devi. The goddess appeared brilliantly in her dream and said, "Child, the prince in the forest is my bhakta. Ask me for a boon, and he shall be yours." Sashikali felt she was drowning in a sea of rapture the next morning. She was so radiant that her mother, the queen, began to press her to divulge the cause of her joy. But Sashikala was bashful and would say nothing. Only to her Saki, the one who had been with her when she first heard of Sudarsana, did she confess the truth, giggling and blushing wildly all the while. Then suddenly, the princess had tears in her eyes as she whispered, "Ah, Saki, what shall I do now? I have never seen the prince, yet I am in love with him. I see him in my dreams, and he is as handsome as Kamadeva. I have no peace anywhere, doing any of the old things that once gave me such simple joy. I can never be happy again until I have the Prince Sudarshana as my husband." The Saki laughed throatily. "Such wild dreams you must be having, princess." Sashikali blushed and said, but the dreams are not real. Why couldn't I have fallen in love with any of the other princes or kings? My father knows how easy everything would be. What is gained easily is seldom worthwhile and hardly lasts a brief session, said her servant, who appeared to know about these things. So Prince Sudarsana, who had lost his kingdom when he was barely 5, who had grown up on wild roots, fruits, and berries in a Rishi's ashram in the heart of the forest, with no wealth or army and no power, found a kingdom to rule over which he never dreamt of. Never knowing it, he became the king of a beautiful princess's heart. Sashikala had learned the Saraswati Mantra when she was just a child, and now she began to chant it every day and to pray to the Devi to make Sudarshana prince of her dreams, the lord of her life. One day when he was meditating on the Kama Mantra, Sudarshana had another vision of the Devi. The next morning it happened that the hunter king of a nearby kingdom brought a gift for Sudarshana, who was his friend. He arrived in the forest with a splendid chariot with 4 white horses yoked. The hermits of the ashram said to Sudarshana, The Devi has blessed you. All the omens cry out that you will soon be a king of this world. Sudarshana redoubled his worship. Anywhere he rode in the chariot, it would seem that an army rode with him of countless foot soldiers. It was the magic of the Mula Mantra. The prince felt as if he already was the monarch of a great kingdom. For the wind whispered that he was, the birds called him Rajan, and the animals of the forest honored him. He worshipped the Devi at every sandhya and was perhaps happier than any king with a real kingdom.
But Sashikala pined for him, the lover she had never set eyes on, and took to her bed with only her favorite Saki to care for her needs. The princess was pale as a lotra flower and never came out of her bedchamber. Her father, King Sabahu of Kashi, decided the only a husband could cure his daughter's ailment, and hastily decided to hold a Swayambara for her, at which she could choose any prince she cared to. Sabahu had an opulent pavilion built for his daughter's Swayambara, but even while the construction was underway, his child said stubbornly to her Saki, "I love Sudarsana. I shan't marry any other prince." The Saki went to the queen and told her what Sashikala had said, and the queen in turn told her husband, Sabahu. The king listened to this in astonishment, and then he began to laugh as if he had never heard anything so absurd. He said to his wife, "Sudarsana is a pauper, holding out in a rishi's ashram. He has no kingdom, no wealth, no army, no power. What kind of a prince is he? Tell Sashikala to remove this foolishness from her head. She will see 100 fine princesses at the Swayamvar. She can choose any of them." The queen called her lovely daughter and set her on her lap, as she used to do when she was a child, and said, "My child, you must forget this fantasy you have woven about Sudarsana. It is time to begin your real life. Your father has heard what you have said, and he has made him very anxious. Do you know that Sudarsana is the most unfortunate prince in all the world? How can you even think of marrying him? He has no kingdom, no friends, except the hermits of the forest, no wealth or power. He lives on roots and fruits, and you, my princess, there is no princess in all the world as beautiful, as accomplished, and as fortunate as you are. Forget this childish fantasy, Sashikala. You will see 100 magnificent princes at your Swayambara, and you can choose any of them to be your husband. Why, Sudarshana himself has a brilliant brother, Shatrajita, who is a king of Kosala. He would be, if you could have him if you want him." The queen lowered her voice, and then she said, with her eyes full of warning, said, "Shatrajita's grandfather, Uttajita, is determined to kill Sudarshana at the first chance he gets. So his grandson's throne is secure. The prince has escaped with his life as far only as the Muni's ashram, who is protecting him, saying that he was just a child and should not be harmed. But the prince is a young man now, and how long will the rishi give him this protection from Uttajita, who is ready to kill him and has already killed his grandfather?" But her daughter replied, "The Devi herself appeared to me in my dream and told me that Sudarshana is destined to be my husband. How can I marry any other man?" The day before the Swayamvara, Sashikala was feverishly with anxiety. She sent a secret messenger, a Brahmin, to the ashram. The message the man bore for the Prince Sudarshana was, "The Devi Bhagavati has ordained that you and I be married. Tomorrow is my Swayamvara. O Prince, make me sure you are in my father's city tomorrow, or I will kill myself before I become any other man's wife." When Sudarshana heard the message, he prepared to set out at once, for an irresistible sense of destiny stirred in him too. The Muni gave him his blessings, but when his mother Manorama heard what he meant to do, she wailed, "You mustn't go. Uttajita will kill you if he sees you there. My son, you are all I have, the support of my old age. Don't abandon me." But her son said serenely, "Mother, what is written must come to pass, and not you nor I can prevent it. But it is the Devi Bhagavati who commands me to attend the Swayamvara, and I must go." Seeing he was determined, his mother began to shower blessings on him. "Ah, my son, let Ambika, the Divine Mother, bless you. May all the goddesses protect you at all times." Then she cried, "I will go with you, my child. You cannot ride alone into danger." Manorama, who was once a queen, climbed into her son's chariot, and they set out for Kashi. In that city, its king Sabahu received them with honor. When he saw how splendid was the prince who had grown in the forest, he housed Sudarshana and his mother in a large mansion and had his own servants wait on him. Kings and princes from all over Bharatvarsha had arrived in Varanasi for Sashikala's Swayamvara, for word of her beauty had traveled everywhere. Yudhijita had come to Kashi as well, bringing his grandson Shatrajita, who was king in Kosala. When Yudhijita heard that Sudarshana had arrived in his chariot and the princes preferred that prince who was nothing, the king roared, "I will kill that upstart. Sashikala will marry my Shatrajita." But the king of Kerala, who was famed for his knowledge of Dharma, said, "This is a Swayamvara where the prince's choice will be binding. There is no place here for arms or a show of strength. Why are you so anxious when Satyajita is such a brilliant prince? Moreover, he is king in Ayodhya. Why shouldn't Sashikala choose him, or indeed any of the other wonderful princes here? Calm yourself, Yudhijita. Your hands are already tainted with Virasina's blood." But the king growled, "That jackal doesn't dare eye the lion's prey. Why is Sudarshana here at all? The Kshatriyas doesn't live by fine words, but by the sword." And he stalked away from the other kings. Seeing Yudhijita was intent on killing Sudarshana, the other kings went to Sabahu, their host. They asked the king of Kashi, "Why is Sudarshana here? Do you make a mockery of this Swayamvara? Yudhijita means to kill him." The king of Kashi said, "My daughter has set her heart on him. How many times I begged her to forget the pauper, but she does not listen. I am helpless, my lord. Sashikala called Sudarshana here, not I." The king of Kerala said, "Let Sudarshana be fetched here. We will ask him what he intends to do." Sudarshana was sent for and came before the glittering throng of rulers of the earth. He stood quietly there, not speaking, until one king said to him, "This is the Swayamvara for royal Kshatriyas. The most powerful princes on earth have come here to vie for the princess's hand. We have all come with our armies, and some of us are ready to do battle for Sashikala. How have you come here unattended, bringing only your mother with you?" Another said, "You have no kingdom, army, or wealth. You don't belong in this company. You are a hermit. Tell us how you dared to come to Kashi." Sudarshana had a smile on his face. In a soft voice, he said, "My lords, all that you say is true. I have no kingdom, legions, friends, or wealth. I had heard of the Swayamvara, and I came to watch it, with no special purposes. But, my lords, I did not come of my own will, but because the Devi Bhagavati told me to. The Devi, who is my goddess, is all of yours as well. I have no enmity with any of you, but if you decide to make an enemy of me, she who is the cause of all causes, the mother of the universe, would protect me. I only do what she asks of me. My life is in the hands of the one who spins the wheel of fate." But the king said, "What you say is true, but Yudhijita means to have your head." Sudarshana laughed. He said, "A man is born into the world by his karma, and by his fate also. Alone does he leave it when his time has come. Not a moment before his time comes can any man be killed by any king or even by the devas. It is only Kal, time, who creates and destroys a man. I am a bhakta of the Divine Mother, from whose hand time flows. She protects me, and I fear neither Uttajita nor any other man." The king saw how determined he was, and the best of them were secretly pleased. Said Vedavyasa to the king, Janamajaya. Jai Mahamaya ki jai, Vishveshwari Mata ki jai, Bole Baba ki jai.